Hi everyone, Ross Johnson here at OneCloudX. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on securing your finances, defending against cyber fraud with EFT Sure and NetSuite. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the account manager here at OneCloudX, so I'm the main point of contact for any queries around how you can best take advantage of the NetSuite solution. I'm also pleased to be joined by John, who's the partnership manager at EFT Sure. John has extensive experience in supplier management and AP technology and is an expert in cyber fraud prevention strategies. EFT Sure allows you to confidently onboard suppliers with a direct link to the ABR to validate the EBN, whilst also cross-matching the bank account details against a verified database of 6 million organisations. Before we get started, just a quick agenda for today. Shortly, I'll pass over to John, who will be discussing the tactics and methods that fraudsters are utilising to gain access to your supply chain and ways that you can prevent them from being able to access the supply chain and protect your business from falling victim. I will then provide an overview of our EFT Sure connector for NetSuite to show how an integration between the two solutions can protect your business. We'll wrap up with a Q&A, so please feel free to leave your questions in the chat box throughout the session, and we'll answer those questions at the end. Now, over to you, John, to get things underway.
Thank you, everybody, for having me today. Let me just share my screen and we can get going. So, yeah, today, as Ross said, we are going to be talking about financial controls and payment controls and securing your supply chain. What I'm not going to do is spend the whole time talking about that, because I think there'd be a few people falling asleep in their sandwiches if we did that. So what I'm really here to talk to you today about really is the need for a cybercrime strategy. So over the rest of the agenda, we're going to be looking at that through the lens of five different topics. The first being the role of the authorizer within the business, so the person that is responsible for making the actual payment to the suppliers. The second being the kind of opponent that you're up against, so the hacker and the fraudsters and the very real threat to your business and to the business community as a whole. The third one that we're looking at is data breaches, because data breaches can sometimes feel a bit nebulous. You see it in the news a lot, but what's the impact of it? A lot of people have the attitude that it's like, well, my data is not really worth anything, so we're going to look at why that's not true. And all of this has been amplified by AI. So I'm going to look at a few examples and talk you through a few examples of how AI is being used today by fraudsters to amplify and scale the work that they're already doing. And this is all kind of doom and gloom and kind of scary stuff that's going on, right? But we're going to look at the impact of manual controls and what your manual controls are up against basically in the digital world. But the underlying theme of today is it's really hard to know who is on the other side of the computer. We say this a lot when it comes to kids on the internet or even ourselves. You don't always know who's on the other side of the computer, and we should treat the way that we make supplier payments in just the same level of skepticism as we do with anything, with anybody anonymous online. So let's just get started. So if you've heard F-Sure speak before, some of this will be things you've probably heard before, but it's worth repeating. But this is blended in with some new stuff from the last sort of 6-12 months as well, new data that's come out. So let's start with the authorizer. So the reason F-Sure exists really, and the reason that we came to be, is because the banks don't authorize payments. So they don't match the BSB and the account number to the account name or to the ABN, the Australian Business Register record either. So really, as the authorizer, it's your responsibility to make sure that when you make a payment, it goes to the right place. And the thing on top of that as well is the banks don't take any liability. So if you do make an incorrect payment, the banks aren't obliged in any way to try and to return that money to you. If you made the wrong payment, that's kind of on you. They will try, but the problem is as soon as that money leaves your bank account, it's very, very difficult to recover it, because if it goes to a fraudster's account, they very quickly will transfer it overseas, or they'll convert it into cryptocurrency or something like that. And it's pretty much gone. It's very difficult to recover. And this isn't just Australia, by the way. This is common across the world. The banks generally don't take liability, and they don't take any responsibility. So this is a gap that fraudsters take advantage of by changing payment details or altering invoices when they can. through getting into your supply chain effectively. Now, it would be unfair to say that that you're completely on your own. There is pressure from the government, so I think before we kind of get into the thick of it, it's fair to give the credit where we can. PayID was brought in a few years ago. That's more for convenience, and it didn't really stop scams. So the government put a bunch of pressure on the banks again, which led to the Scam Safe Accord, which was over $100 million worth of investment to try and bring in more technology to do things like matching of bank accounts. And there is some progress in that area, right? I think Westpac is bringing in NameCheck, and there is some other technologies coming in. What I would say, and what EFTsure say, is a lot of this is consumer focused, and regardless of whatever the banks bring in, if it involves the bank, it's at the point of payment. And what we know is that if there's something going wrong at the point of payment, then it's too late in the process. Something has gone wrong earlier in your supply chain to lead to an incorrect payment potentially being made. So that's point one. That's the context of where we're at. The second thing is the opponents, the fraudsters that you're up against. Now, Hollywood has this, it's painted this picture of hackers as, some guy in the basement, or, some sort of trendy guy who's typing away on a computer that looks like the Matrix, and, they're almost like a Robin Hood type figure sometimes. And this absolutely isn't the case whatsoever. It gives a disservice, really, I suppose, to the sophistication of hackers and the organizations they work for. You will find, if there is a hack and a data breach, and it's not necessarily a criminal that is trying to do a fraud themselves, they're just stealing information. The thing is, they're stealing that information to sell it to a cybercrime organization or a syndicate. And they're selling it because that syndicate will be able to use that to steal money from businesses and individuals. So it's a highly commercial crime at all stages of the process, right? Even if it's just stealing data. And because it's a commercial crime, it's highly, highly organized. So these organizations that are global, by the way, they have offices, they're not just online. They have shareholders in some cases. They have KPIs they work towards. They use a wealth of legitimate and illegitimate technology, and they hire a lot of really good talent. This is the scary thing, right? And you often say that cartoons reflect reality, and I think this one is particularly true. This organized crime syndicate, for health and safety reasons, will be transitioning to cybercrime. And it's true, right? It's a frustratingly safe form of crime, really, because it's cross-border, because it's global, and because, there's nobody stealing $1 million from a bank in a white van anymore. It's so easy to steal money online and just disappear into the ether with it. So I'm going to talk you through a pretty scary example now, actually. So a lot of the work that we do is obviously desk-based research. But one guy that wasn't going to settle for desk-based research is this guy, Ken Gamble. He's the executive chairman of the IFW Global, which is like this, it's a global anti-cybercrime organization. And what they managed to do was they got an undercover employee in a cybercrime operation in Ukraine. And what Ken said when he was on our podcast a couple of months ago was this organization they got into had about 500 employees. And just look at what he says here. Everything is run like an industrialized corporation. It has a HR department, accounting, finance, sales, onboarding, and they bring in the best possible people with university degrees. Now, that's a far sight away from what we would believe as a guy in his basement tapping away. Right? These are big, organized companies. It looks very much like our company, our software company. And this leads us on to this study by Kaspersky. It's hard to say, Kaspersky, where they looked at the salaries, the jobs that were going on the dark web for cybercrime organizations, and they looked 6-figure salaries, bonuses, paid time off. And what they did is they looked at a bunch of organizations that are called APTs, Advanced Persistent Threat Groups. And so this is the kind of thing that you're up against, right? Big organized companies. This is what Kaspersky found. When they were looking at jobs on the dark web, they found that there were lots of jobs going for analysts, developers, attackers, reverse engineers, designers, testers, admin. And this looks a lot like your average software company, right? These organizations are built much like legitimate software companies, but with the specific purpose of stealing money from other businesses and individuals as well. And this graph on the right, what you see is the total number of jobs advertised on the dark web per quarter. That the reason the bar at the start is so high is because that was right around COVID. And what we see is that as the world becomes a bit more volatile, as there's more division happening in the world, cybercrime goes up. And so if you think about what's been happening over the last 12, 18 months with Russia and Ukraine and things like that, the volatility in the US, we're seeing this number start to rise again. So, but one of the things we always used to get asked was, okay, there's all this crime happening, but where's it coming from? Who's doing it? And we never used to have a good answer really until April this year. The WCI released this Geography of Commercial Cybercrime study, where they looked at country by country, the impact that the cybercrime from that country was having, how professional it was, how skilled they are at doing it. And on the right-hand side is just what they're good at, basically, what that country is best at. So, if you wanted somebody to do a technical attack and shut down some servers, you could talk to the Russians. To be honest, you could probably talk to the Russians for any of these things. They're pretty good at all of them. But if you wanted, a payment redirection scam or something like that, you could speak to someone from Nigeria. Now, what's interesting about this is there's a lot of the familiar faces that you would assume probably to see, but then there's a few in there that you wouldn't. For example, the United States is very good at data breaches. The United Kingdom, where I'm from, is pretty good at laundering money. I mean, who'd have guessed given our history, right? So it's not always the same people that you would expect. These kind of scams can come from anywhere, and this is just a couple of different views of looking at it. Now, despite what these countries are good at individually and what they specialize in, there's one thing that they all have in common, and this is a really key point. There's one thing they have in common, and they all know that the best way to get to you and your business's money is through people. So 8 out of 10 cybersecurity incidents, 8 out of 10 cybersecurity incidents happen because of human error. It's nothing to do with integrations or a fault on the back end or something like that, or a Microsoft failing or anything like that. It's because somebody clicks on something, or somebody gives access to something they shouldn't do, or they leak some information they shouldn't have done, and it comes from a person. And the fraudsters know this. The fastest form of social engineering scam, which is vendor impersonation, it could be employee impersonation, anything like that, is vendor impersonation, sorry, I should say. So you need to have in place the right systems, the right security around those systems, firewalls, things like that, the proper controls. You need to have staff training as well, so controls around what your staff are doing. But you also need to have some control of your supply chain. And that's the difficult thing. That's the thing that fraudsters know is the way to get to through that supply chain, because you have so little control. That's where the vulnerability is. And this next slide is you're going to think of somebody straight away when you read this. Every company has at least one employee who will click on anything. And when you read that, you probably think of somebody. And if you don't, it might be time to look in the mirror. I don't know. And Brad Smith at Microsoft, the chief legal officer, said this, but when we look at this, we think, yeah, but in cyber fraud with financial crime, you only need somebody to click on something once for a hacker to gain access to your system. A dodgy Zoom link, put your details into a fake Australian government website, something like that. And then the problem with that is, okay, so you can lock down what your employees are doing, and you can put controls around your system and all this kind of stuff. But every company might have one employee who will click on anything. But you'll have one employee or a supplier with one employee who will click on anything once. And so fraudsters will take advantage of this because managing your supply chain kind of falls between your financial controls. Like, does it sit with the CFO and the financial controls and how you engage with vendors? Kind of, yeah. Does it fall under your IT officers and your cybersecurity policy? Also kind of, yeah. And what hackers are very good at doing and fraudsters are very good at doing is threading the needle between these two sets of responsibilities to create vulnerabilities and to steal from businesses. So, I mean, one really good example of this that we saw a couple of years ago was a Sydney hedge fund. One of the guys there clicked on a dodgy Zoom link. that gave hackers access to his systems. They made a fraudulent payment of $8 million, which wasn't enough to sink the hedge fund. But what was enough to sink the hedge fund was the money that got pulled out off the back of that, the lack of investment that they got off the back of that, and all the banks losing confidence in them. And ultimately that hedge fund collapsed. But it's not just hedge funds, right? We see this kind of stuff all the time in the news. You're always seeing supply chain vulnerabilities, hackers stealing data and things like that, right? Invoice scams, it comes up all the time in the news. But one that you won't have seen, because it didn't make the headlines, is this example that I want to talk to you about now. So we're going to kind of get into the nitty gritty here. So this is an example of a vendor email compromise, and this is a real example. So this is a real fraud that EFT Sure have stopped. It's one of our clients. We've changed all the names for obvious legal reasons, but everything you see here, the back and forth that I'm going to talk you through, is exactly how a fraudster attempted to steal some money from one of our clients. So the person you see here, Bonnie is the supplier of one of EFT Sure's clients. Okay, so she works for the supplier. And what happened is a fraudster has managed to get access to Bonnie's email. We don't know how exactly, because that was before our visibility starts, but at some point a hacker's got into Bonnie's email. So the hacker can now view all of Bonnie's emails coming in and out, and he can also impersonate Bonnie through her actual email address. So what the fraudsters will do is, once they get access, they'll sit and they'll watch what happens when a payment is due to be made, how the company interacts with each other, how people interact with Bonnie, and they'll just wait and they'll get an understanding of what the process is to make a payment, so they can impersonate you or your suppliers as well as they possibly can. So Sarah, who works for our client, Bridge Builders, so Bridge Builders is the EFT Sure client, Bonnie's the supplier, sends an email to Bonnie to say, for your reference, I've attached payment certificate 38. Have a great afternoon. And what payment certificate 38 means is just, it's basically, as far as we know, it's a notification to say a payment is going to be made. The fraudster sees this and, using Bonnie's email address, writes back to Sarah and says, would you kindly provide us with a payment date? Take this opportunity to let you know we've recently updated our bank account details, which is a classic move from a fraudster, right? And then to try and create a bit of urgency, we appreciate your prompt attention to the matter and look forward to continuing business with it. Yeah. So that's a really common way that fraudsters will do, is try to update the bank account details when a payment's due to be made, and try and create a sense of urgency, because the payment's due soon. Can you deal with this fast? We need to get paid, to try and get you to make a change without really doing all the proper controls and checks. So Sarah gets this back, sends it to Jack, who works for her, asks him to update the bank account details so they can pay the right account. Now, Jack writes back to Bonnie and asks for an updated set of bank details on a letterhead. Now, this is really common, but unfortunately, it's an incredibly weak control, because if the fraudster's got access to Bonnie's email address, then it's very easy for him to just go into any of her emails, find an attachment, find a document that's been sent by or to Bonnie, take that, put some bank account details on it, send it to Jack. Or just use Photoshop, right, and just create their own letterhead. It's really easy to fraud. So it's a very weak control, but it's very common. Fraudster does exactly that. Very personable, going back and forth, all the rest of it. Now, if that was the end of it, Jack would make that payment of $48,000, and that would be the end of it, and they wouldn't see that money. The fraudster would get paid. But they're using EFT Sure. And without getting into all the details now, because we'll sort of talk to you a bit later on about what we do, is EFT Sure has a verification process on our side whenever there is a supplier change request. It involves some secure forms with some metadata and some back-end checking, and our fraud prevention team. So the verification process is triggered due to a vendor change request. We then reach out to Bonnie specifically, and so what we would do is try and call the supplier to get those details verified. We would use the onboarding form to get those details verified as well. So what happens is we speak to Bonnie. We find out that Bonnie tells us that they're banking with Westpac, not ANZ. So they end up failing the verification process. Sarah then reaches out to Bonnie and says, you failed. And this is where Sarah probably drops the ball a little bit. And this is something that you shouldn't do, is she puts her phone number in the email to the supplier to say to call me if you have any questions. Now, if the fraudster was on his game and you know, working as best as they possibly could to do this fraud, they would probably just call Sarah and they would try and get that payment approved anyway. They would try and do it directly with Sarah, but they don't. The fraudster emails back and makes some excuse about, you know, a new AP team member not aware of the details change, and then asks if FSure can contact him directly on this number and he can confirm it. Now, this is one thing maybe to take away from this is EFTSure would never use a phone number provided by a supplier in an email or anything like that. And you shouldn't either. You should always try and independently verify the phone number through a supplier website. Maybe if there's an aggregate website as well, or anything else, try and verify that phone number outside of the conversation with the supplier. Because again, it's very easy for a fraudster just to give their own phone number and you speak to them and they provide you with the details, you think it's right, and suddenly the money's gone. So never use a phone number from a fraudster. At this point, we have some back and forth behind the scenes. We realize it's a fraud that's going on, and Ben Affleck, I forgot to mention Ben Affleck runs this company, of course, gets involved and shuts down the fraud. And so we do this by, they'll kick the fraudster out of the systems by resetting all the passwords, all the access, but then a big lengthy process has to take place to investigate how this happened, right? So that stopped the fraud from taking place. It's great, didn't make the news, but the question still remains, how does the fraudster get access in the first place, and how do they do these kind of scams, right? So that takes us on to data breaches, because they play a huge, huge part in how hackers gain access to systems in the first place. So again, much like with the compromises I showed just before that example, you see this stuff all the time in the news. The Optus leak from 11 million records a couple of years ago. There was the Medibank one, HWL Ebsworth, the pubs and clubs one earlier this year. And then just recently, actually, in the last week or so, you may have seen the Medisecure data breach from last year, which had 13 million Australian records leaked in it. I think it was over 6.5 terabytes worth of data globally. That was recently confirmed to have been sold on the dark web for $50,000 to somebody. And now they're trying to sell it again to a second person at a discounted rate of $25,000. So that's just from a data breach, right? So imagine the amount of money that the fraudsters can make by buying that data. They're willing to pay that amount of money for it. More recently, we've seen Ticketmaster and stuff like that as well. And what ends up happening in those breaches is those millions of records. So let's use the Optus hack, for example, 11 million records. They're dumped online in some way or sold online in some way. Fraudsters can buy it, as I said, and they can use that to improve the scams. So the breach leads to an improvement in the quality of ID theft, which means that fraudsters can impersonate people to a much better degree. And it leads to more complex and more sophisticated social engineering scams. And a social engineering scam, like I said, is somebody impersonating Bonnie, somebody impersonating a supplier, anything like that. So I'll give you an example of this. So this is Nick. Nick's our head of marketing. He's kindly allowed us to use his details. So please don't take this away and try and impersonate Nick off the back of this. But let's say I just have Nick's name and his email address. And his physical address. That's all I have. So if I've got Nick's name, I can very easily just Google it, find his LinkedIn. I can find where he works. I can find who his boss is. And I can find who he works with. So I get a picture of the kind of people he's working with, the people he's spending his time with, the organization he works for, the kind of job that he's in, the kind of things that he's going to be interested in, right? And that's so easy to find. You just literally just put his name into LinkedIn. Now, let's say we've got his address as well. So if we've got his address, there's a couple of things we can infer from that. We can Google his address and we can find, okay, so he lives at Queenscliff Road. I can see he's rented this property. I know what the value of his property is. And from the value of the property that he's renting, I can guess his income. And if I can guess his income, then I kind of know, again, what kind of things he would be interested in. But what I also know from these kind of pages, and this stuff is really easy to find online across a couple of different property websites, I can also find the context of his address and where he lives. So I know he rents his apartment from Stone Real Estate in Manly, and I know the value of it. Right. So now I have a couple of things. I know his name. I know who he works for. I can take a pretty good guess at his income, and I've got the context of his property and his address. Right. So with that, I can knock an email together. I can say, "Hi, Nick. It's a quick one. It's Linda from Stone Real Estate Manly. I tried calling you about your rent, but we have 2 phone numbers on file." And I send 2 phone numbers through. Can you go to our portal and update the right number? Now, those phone numbers might be correct. They might be incorrect. If it's the Optus hack, one of them is probably right. But it doesn't matter at all. I don't care. All I want Nick to do is click the link to go through to my dodgy portal so I can gain access to his machine. Right? If he's on a work machine, even better. And I can do this with just a couple of variables. So if you think about that Optus hack of 11 million records, right? I can use some sort of mail merge. I could use a program just to change all this stuff. So it doesn't matter if it's Nick, it could be any rental agency, any phone numbers that I've got. The more information I can put into this email that looks legitimate to Nick, the more likely it is that he's going to click on the link. So extrapolate that out. 11 million records from Optus, we've got Nick's. We might have a bunch of other people as well. So we can make a segment for Stone Real Estate Manly. So again, it's typical marketing work, right? You see this with your marketing teams. They create segments of prospects and customers so you can send targeted messaging out. Fraudsters do exactly the same thing, right? So I might have my Stone Real Estate Manly segment. I might have a segment of people that have bought houses from Ray White. I might even go as far as to say, okay, well, I'm going to do it based off job title and role. So HR leaders. So I'm going to look for people that maybe have recently changed jobs. Or perhaps if they're HR leaders, I might send them an email about new legislation that's coming through for employees, or you could send them something pretending to be a person that works at the same business that is starting litigation against them. That might get them to panic click something. So there's a lot of things hackers can do from just that data that maybe we don't think about sometimes to target people specifically. And they don't have to do this manually. 11 million records is a lot. But they can use really simple scraping tools and programs just to scrape data off websites and populate this stuff. So it's an incredibly scalable process. But what you find now over the last couple of years is this data is now being enriched with AI, which AI really is used as an accelerator, and it helps fraudsters operate at scale efficiently and effectively and in a much more sophisticated manner than they ever could do before. So the way to look at this, I think, the way to sort of think about this simply in the context of fraud is there's kind of 3 levels to AI sophistication within the fraud world. The first that we're already seeing is the written word and improving phishing emails. So often when you get a dodgy email from a fraudster, things give it away, right? Poor grammar, poor spelling, punctuation's not great, because often English might be the second language for somebody doing this. But what you find is, you put that through ChatGPT, very quickly it'll clean that email up and it'll look professionally written. So what you're going to see over the next couple of months and years as this becomes more and more common is that the quality of phishing emails is going to go through the roof, and it's going to become much more difficult to identify a phishing email. The second level is voice impersonation. And last year, I think it was something like April last year, it took just 3 seconds of your voice for a fraudster to be able to use an impersonation tool to sound pretty close to what you sound like. And that was last year. This year, now, I can only imagine that time frame has probably gone down. But what's more likely is that using that 3 seconds of your voice, they can do a much better impression of you, an impersonation of you or your suppliers than they ever could before, right? It's only going to get better. This is being used already. So in Washington last year, there was this scam that was happening where elderly people were being called by what they thought was their grandchildren. They would be saying things like, "Oh, I've had a misdemeanor. I need bail money," basically. So then the elderly people would be sending them, a couple of $1,000s, something like that. But it was going to the fraudster, and that happened enough to make the Washington Post. It was a bit of an epidemic, and it's really a pretty disgusting way that fraudsters are targeting people that are vulnerable. But anybody can fall for this, right? If it's somebody that you know quite well and you hear their voice, you're going to trust them. And the third level of this, which is starting to become more prevalent in bigger frauds, but you'll start to see it more common, I think, over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, is the use of deepfakes. So you may be familiar with deepfakes, deepfake video scams. It's where you use a program to mask your face in some way so that you look like somebody else. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to speed up a little bit. But here's this example from Hong Kong from last year. There was a finance worker at a multinational firm who joined a Teams call with his CFO and a bunch of other people in his team. They went through lines of payment that were due to be made, and he ended up going and transferring $25 million over a handful of transactions to a bunch of different bank accounts. Now, what he didn't realize at the time was he was the only real person from his company on that call. The 10, 11 other people, including his CFO, were all fraudsters using deepfake technology to look like his employees and to use voice masking technology to make themselves sound like the other people as well. And so he got tricked into making these payments. They did that by getting access to the systems, looking at how this company makes payments, and then they just mimicked that using that technology. $25 million gone. But I lied to you a bit because there is a fourth level. And have you ever heard this phrase before? In a gold rush, sell shovels. And so, the smart fraudsters, the smart hackers, they're not going to be doing the frauds themselves. They're going to be selling the technology to other fraudsters to do it themselves. And so I'm going to tell you about this thing called the Business Invoice Swapper. Right? Business Invoice Swapper is available on Telegram. We found it on Telegram during our research. Telegram is an anonymous, secure messaging and social media application. It is used by fraudsters. It has legitimate applications as well, but obviously because of the nature of it being a secure, anonymous messaging service, it has criminal application. And there's this guy called Google Xcoder who runs an organization called GXC. You see where I got the name from. They create artificial intelligence tools for advanced functions, programs, EXEs, web applications. They sell things like scam pages and stuff like that as well. And this is really easy to buy via Telegram. So they'll sell something like a phishing kit of the Australian government website, has all the latest fraud technology built into the back end of it, costs $400. So it's so cheap just to get one of these pages. And it looks legitimate, right? It looks exactly like the government website. And so what they'll do is they'll sell things like phishing kits to try and allow fraudsters to steal data from people. And then once a fraudster is in somebody's account, they have this program as well called the Business Invoice Swapper. And so this is a screenshot of what the invoice swapper looks like on Telegram for purchase. And it's sold just like any other piece of software that you as a business might purchase. Lists of features and functionality, comes with unlimited support, pretty good offer, right? And it's priced like a SaaS software as well. It's priced on a subscription basis. Now, the other thing is as a fraudster, I could buy a lifetime access to this for $15,000. The average amount of money that's stolen in a payment redirection scam, like with the Bonnie example, is $64,000 is the average amount of money stolen. And that's before legal fees and brand damage and, the technical cleanup and all the rest of it. The actual money is $64,000. So I only need to get, on average, one person to fall for a scam, and I've already made my money back, 4 times over easily. So it's a very lucrative, business, and it's a very profitable enterprise for these fraudsters. So what the Business Invoice Swapper does, you might use a piece of technology like an APA solution, something like that, accounts payable automation to scan invoices, and process them to automate that function. It works very similar, but instead of it scanning those invoices and processing it, it scans those invoices and replaces the data in there with something else. That's a screenshot of it. And so what it'll do is it can, you can set a bunch of parameters around these invoices. You can look at, You can tell it to only do it for suppliers that are sending you invoices within a certain value threshold, maybe with certain payment terms. It could be only from specific suppliers, and it'll change the bank account details. It can change the values. It can change whatever you want it to, really. And then, then the app, it's great. It has notifications and alerts. So once it does what it does, the fraudster gets a notification to say, and through Telegram, to tell them that an invoice has been updated, what the value is, and all the rest of it, so they can monitor it as they go along, right? So it's a really clever bit of technology that uses the kind of technology that we think is making our lives better, our working environment, easier, but it's using it for nefarious purposes. So this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't know about until it happens, because from you as the buyer, you're just getting an invoice from your supplier as you always would. And this is why it's so important that the controls are in place, right? And so this is where these come in. This is where your manual controls are up against, and this is the struggle, I suppose, because the modern threats that we're facing from fraudsters using AI tools and data breaches to enhance what they're doing, the manual controls that are in place, I would assume a lot of businesses haven't updated them in the last 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. And that's a problem, because with this AI technology that's come through, for example, it's really only started to kick off and be used mainstream by fraudsters in the last sort of 2 years. Something to think about is the manual controls, right? And so we're just going to go through a couple of those right now. These are all the things that you should be doing, and I hope you're doing a lot of these things. But the thing I think we should just talk about quickly is callback procedures, because this is the last line of defense, really, for making a fraudulent payment. So you should all be doing callback controls. Your businesses should all be doing callback controls. But what I would say is ask your AP team, are they trained on the latest scams and frauds? If yes, do you always ignore incoming information, like the Bonnie example, the phone number that came in? Do you independently source that phone number? Is yes. If that's yes, where do you get it from? If you get it from a website, how do you know that website is legitimate? So, do you look at how old that website is? When was it created? How do you know it's a legitimate supplier website and not a fraudulent supplier website? When you make your call back to the supplier, do you ever lead the witness? Do you ask them leading questions in any way? And if you don't, can you do all that stuff at volume and velocity perfectly? So that's the question, really. And I think it's, as accounts payable teams and finance teams, it's unfair almost to expect you to be an expert in cyber fraud, because it's one of those creeps from the job. I think it's come into the role where the expectation is you'll be able to handle this stuff because it's part of the role, but it's kind of unfair, right? It was never really much part of the job 5 years ago, even, but now it's a huge part of it. So what can you do? And I'm going to wrap up really quick, Ross, so you've got a bit of time. This is where your cybercrime strategy comes in. So we talk about this in 5 different elements of cybercrime strategy, 5 different areas. So let's just go through these quickly, and then I'll let Ross kind of show you in practice what this means. First thing, training. There's lots of free resources for training your team and training yourselves and the business. F-Sure produces a lot of these. So cybersecurity guide for CFOs. We have a bunch of other resources. I'd also recommend, we have a podcast called On the Defense. So if the example with Ken Gamble interested you, where with the undercover person in that operation in Ukraine, if you find that interesting, we have a half-an-hour talk with Ken Gamble on that, where he talks about that a lot. I'd recommend you go check that out. There's also things like ScamWatch, produce a lot of content, ID Care. But if you do have some budget, Phishing Friendly and a bunch of other companies similar to Phishing Friendly do email training to train your team on what to look out for in scam emails. Next thing's culture. Culture is kind of critical. It's difficult to change because it's a bit of a funny one, really. It's hard to change. But what I would say is encourage openness and trust within the team, and try and have a high shame threshold. So if somebody thinks they've clicked on something or they've done something, they don't want to feel embarrassed for that, but try and create an environment where they can come to you quickly and say, I think this has happened. Because as I've told you in those examples, fraudsters can wait weeks, months, just waiting for the right time to strike. So the impact of a breach might not happen immediately. It's important that people can feel as if they can come to you and come to the team to say, I've made a mistake here, and you get it fixed before something happens. Very quickly on internal controls, like we talked about already. So I'm not going to go through these again, but one thing I would say is try and manage staff exits really well. We see with our clients a lot of fraud attempts happen because a fraudster gets access to an account that wasn't shut down upon a staff exit. So, if you're using for example, if somebody has access to NetSuite, they leave, you don't shut down their account properly, think of the amount of damage they could do with even a semi-level of seniority within NetSuite. Any finance tool, to be honest with you, it's not just NetSuite, right? So manage staff exits really well. Do things like pressure testing, pen testing, stuff like that. So we do that with technology. You should be doing pen testing with your technology. Do it with your team as well. Modify phone numbers on accounts, duplicate an invoice, send one through, try and change some supply details, see if anybody notices it. And, just make it something maybe you do quarterly, something like that. Make it part of a bit of a game, see if people notice it or not, get people looking out for it. Maybe that could be a way to try and change the culture around it. And then finally, technology. I guess as the world gets more granular and it becomes more complex, the thing is you probably are going to need some technology. We've seen that across every side of the business, right? You used to just get away with having either just, like an ERP or a CSM type thing. Now you need lots of different applications all plugged in together to meet the needs of the modern business world. Cyber fraud is kind of no different. So you should be keeping NetSuite up to date to make sure you've got the latest security patches. You should be having the right level of virus protection, firewalls, things like that. And I would really strongly suggest you look into vendor management and payment protection as well, which is where we come in. F-Sure is a supplier and payment verification solution and fraud prevention solution. And because all kinds of businesses need to pay suppliers, we work with all kinds of businesses. But they're more than just customers, really. What our clients are is the core of the protection that we provide to all of our clients, and it's the core of the F-Sure supplier network. And so what I mean by the supplier network is, let's just take this as an example. Here are our clients, an example of some clients on the screen. Alfred Health has a supply chain, right? So when we bring on Alfred Health, we cleanse and verify their supplier data and get it all in line with the correct data. We give them a report as part of the onboarding, but we cleanse that supplier database and we make sure the data in there is correct. We do that for New South Wales Ports. We do that for 7-Eleven when they become a client, and so on across the whole of our client database. So now we have this supply chain, this supply network of over 6 million records, which actually makes up over 92% of all registered Australian businesses that form the F-Sure network. So let's look at what exactly that means. So if we've got New South Wales Ports, we've got Built, and we've got Victoria that are all clients of EFT Sure, they might have a common supplier. That common supplier works across all three of them, right? And so we know, because we've verified them for New South Wales Ports and for Victoria and for Built, that data is correct. Now, if Built, for example, is being targeted by a fraudster that's got access to this supplier's email address or account, and they try and get Built to send the money to an incorrect bank account, to a fraudster's bank account, we recognize that because Built are using EFT Sure, and we give it a red thumbs down in the system. I should have pointed out maybe when we verify a supplier record, we give it a big green thumbs up. So within NetSuite that's a big green thumbs up. That's the correct supplier bank account, ABN, bank account name, all the rest of it, right? When Built is targeted, if a supplier tries to change those records or get that vendor record changed, we give Built a thumbs down because it doesn't match the data within the network. Now, let's say that's not the case. We would catch it during the verification process. We would advise Built, we would let the supplier know, we get that fixed. What Built benefits from in that instance is the security within numbers of the network. Now, if a new client joins, there's a very high chance, because we have 92% of all ABNs already in the network, there's a very high chance that the vast majority of the supply base is already verified within the network. So quickly we can knock off a load of that supply base and make sure they're right. But what we do find during onboarding is maybe like 25% or so of the supplier database needs some kind of cleanup. That might be It's not all fraudulent. It's not 25% fraudulent. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's generally things like some fraudulence. It could be old bank account details, could be incorrect details in some other way. So there's about 25% incongruence. So by joining the network, you get the benefit of the whole, the security of the whole network together, right? Because for a fraudster to be able to change a record within our network and to get access to this and start scamming our clients, they would need to get the details changed across all of the clients that are using them at the same time and get past our internal verification team. So Ross, I'm going to hand over to you here, I think, at this point, because I'm just conscious I've probably taken a bit extra time. But that's effectively what we do. We have a supplier network. We cleanse the vendor master file at the point of a client onboarding. We have a verification process, which strengthens and enhances the existing callback procedures you should probably be doing, but we do that as well using our in-house fraud prevention team. We also have a payment review and an online bank as well. When you see those thumbs, Ross will show you, you see that live during the payment process. So with that in mind, Ross, I'm really sorry. I think I've taken up probably a bit too much time there, mate, but I'll hand over to you and let you take over.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for that, John. Really fascinating insight into, I guess, the sophistication that cybercrime is adopting these days, and yeah, obviously some insight into the ways that we can combat that as well. So fascinating stuff, and yeah, no problem at all about the time. We've got 10 minutes left, so I can provide a quick demonstration of our EFT Sure for NetSuite connector. So I'll just share my screen just now. Perfect. Can you just confirm for me, John, that you can see that okay?
Yeah, we can see that, mate.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so as John touched on there, technology is one of the best defenses that a business can use to protect itself from all of this sophisticated cybercrime. Now, with that in mind, as you may be aware, NetSuite does already have some mechanisms in place to make sure that your AP team is protected. Now, that's the likes of supplier approval processes, bank detail approval processes, to make sure that that data, that vendor master data that you're entering within NetSuite is being approved by somebody else within the organization. Now, we've gone one step beyond that by partnering with EFT Sure to make sure that all of those controls and verifications in EFT Sure are also available within NetSuite. So we've allowed you to leverage that power of EFT Sure without actually leaving NetSuite by providing visibility of that verification status on the supplier record within NetSuite. So when you're creating or editing a supplier record or bank details within NetSuite, that's going to create a corresponding supplier record in EFT Sure. All of those validations and verifications, the checks of the ABN and the bank details are going to happen within EFT Sure, and then that's going to update that status within NetSuite so that you can see that that has been verified from EFT Sure. Now, we've gone one step further than that as well by also including those status in the EFT payment processing within NetSuite. So when you go to generate an ABA file as part of a payment run, you can also use that EFT Sure status within NetSuite to make sure that you're only paying suppliers that have been verified as part of that process. Now, I've got about 10 minutes left and want to make sure that we've got time to answer any questions at the end. But I've just jumped into a demo account of NetSuite here. Now you can see that we have currently got a list of all the suppliers within this demo account. So you would access this in NetSuite by going to suppliers, relationships, suppliers here. Now you see here that we are looking at our EFT Sure suppliers view. Now what this is showing is our EFT Sure status across these different suppliers. So we can see here straight away which suppliers have been verified in EFT Sure, those that have been identified as perhaps having an invalid payee, or those that haven't been verified within the system there. Now, given that this is just using a NetSuite Safe Search, we can go one step further. So if we want to use a traffic light system, taking those different thumbs up, so if we're looking at green, red, and orange across those different thumbs within EFT Sure, then we can also display that information within NetSuite as well. Now, clicking on to one of the supplier records here, just as an example, you see here that we've got that EFT Sure status as supplier verified here. So this has gone through that full verification process, and we can see within NetSuite that this supplier is verified for us to pay. Now, although this in this demo account, we've got this EFT Sure status field here, given that this is a custom field within NetSuite, this could be positioned wherever you need that to be on the supplier record. So perhaps on the financial tab here, or perhaps in an additional EFT Sure status tab, wherever you want that to be located within your supplier record in NetSuite is no problem at all. So just opening up a supplier record here, and this is one that I have started entering the information in, but not completed. So if we go to this demo supplier and enter in some bank details, I'll show you how the integration with EFT Sure works. So we'll just enter some new bank details here. And now, of course, this is just going to be some dummy bank details, but in actuality, you would be entering the real details of your supplier here. So I'll just enter in the mandatory fields. And I'll enter in a bank account number just for the sake of time. I'll just enter in a dummy bank account here, call this demo supplier, and I'll enter in our bank number and our branch number, which combined make up our BSB. Now, once we save those bank details, so once again, if we are creating a new supplier in bank details or editing existing suppliers or bank details, that's going to integrate and send across that information to EFT Sure, where a corresponding record is going to be created or updated. You see there, as we entered in the bank details, the status has gone to not yet verified for this demo supplier. Now, if we open up our EFT Sure demo account that we've got here, you see a list of all of the different suppliers, as well as that verification status that we've been talking about. So whether that's a green thumbs up, orange meaning that it's not yet been verified, or red meaning that there's been some discrepancies found there, whether that be within the ABN or the BSB, any of the bank details that have gone across. So if we just search for our demo supplier, you'll see here in real time that has been created within our EFT Sure demo account. So we can see here that the supplier record was added at 12:55 when I created that record within NetSuite, and it's identified that there needs to be these details verified. So we have gone to a status of pending. Now, whilst also doing that, you'll see here that we have verified that the ABN is valid. So this is a correct ABN, as within the ABR. But we have also identified that the account name does not match the company name within that ABR as well. So starting to get some insights into the details that have been sent across from NetSuite into EFT Sure. Now, as part of this process, we'll see here that new details have been requested. Now, what that means is EFT Sure are sending an email to that new supplier. They're requesting confirmation of those bank details. And once they have been confirmed, it's going to then be checked against that network, which John has just spoken through there. Now, once that has been checked and verified within EFT Sure, if we take an example here, that will then go to a status of verified. We'll get that green thumbs up and we'll have that message that has been EFT Sure verified. Now, as this is a two-way integration, once that verification status has been obtained, that's then going to update the NetSuite supplier record, and you'll be able to see that that has been verified within EFT Sure against their database. Now, from there, as well as having visibility of that on the supplier record itself, when you go to process any EFT files, so as part of that bill payment processing within NetSuite, we also have added in the option to use that EFT Sure status as a filter here. Now, this could be a default filter. So say, for example, you only ever want to pay suppliers that have that supplier verified status, then that can be defaulted into this EFT bill payment screen, which means whenever you go to do a payment run and pay suppliers within NetSuite, that filter would apply, and only invoices for suppliers that have been verified would show as part of that EFT bill payments process. Now, of course, that's been a pretty quick overview, just in the interest of time, on how our EFT Sure connector for NetSuite works. If you want a more in-depth demo, if you want to see it with maybe some of your own data and your own examples, then we'd be more than happy to facilitate that. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just stop here and pause for any questions that we have had in the Q&A box. Okay, so just one question about getting a recorded copy of the demonstration. Yep, that's no problem. We can send across a recording following this session so that you can share that amongst the team as well. Okay, another question that we've had is, maybe this is one for you, John. Why would I need something like this if I have cyber insurance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the simple answer is you have home insurance, but you don't leave your front door unlocked. You know, the cyber insurance is helpful for recovering from damages and something that goes wrong, but it isn't the answer to the question, right? Like you don't not put your seatbelt on, you don't purposefully try and drive poorly just because you've got car insurance. You want to stop anything happening before it actually happens. Cyber insurance will help you recover some of the financial damage, but what it won't do is help you with the brand damage, help you with the downtime you'll experience from having to investigate how a breach took place, or any of the other fallout that comes from it. So you should have both. I would say you should have cyber insurance. It should be part of your cybersecurity strategy, but it's not a turnkey. It's not the answer to all the problems.
Okay, perfect. See that we're approaching the hour, so it might be about time to wrap up there. Is there any other questions that we've got in the chat?
I don't know how to answer Stuart's question, in which case in there that if he's never received a request, you've obviously skirted around it. I'm not sure. Our network is over 90% of Australian registered businesses, so don't know.
Yeah. We've got another question there just in terms of the cost involved in setting this up. So maybe John, from your side, in terms of, we can obviously send out more information on the costings, but if you want to add any detail from your side.
Yeah, I mean, the without knowing the specifics of your business, the pricing is based around the amount of spend with suppliers and the amount of onboardings and offboardings you have a month. So a pretty standard SaaS model.
Okay, well, that's us came up to the hour. I'm not seeing any more questions for now. I think, John, if you're free, we'll maybe stay for a couple more minutes just to make sure that we catch any questions at the end. But thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. And thanks a lot, John, for coming on today and giving us that great insight. It's been really interesting stuff. If there's any questions following the session, maybe any questions that anyone wants to ask offline, then please do get in touch with us here at OneCloudX or directly with John. I can share details, anything at all, whether that be on the EFT Sure solution itself or the EFT Sure connector for NetSuite, then please do reach out and we'd be happy to take any questions. If you do want a more in-depth session as well, and based on your specific business need, then once again, more than happy to set that up and run through some examples that might be more sort of along what you'd be looking to see. But once again, thanks everyone for joining. We will be sharing the recording. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.